Um, well, thank you for being here. Thank you, the LRC. As my dissertation, my work is with queer studies, and when I was teaching, right in my dissertation, I was teaching at a different college, and I was teaching Spanish, and I was observed by one of the coordinators in class, and she came to my class, she observed my class, and at the end of the comments, when we were discussing my class, she came to me and said, you know, you should have corrected one of the students that said something in class. And her words, you should have corrected. And this student said in class in Spanish, my husband is a doctor. I don't remember the profession, but he said, and the student said, my husband is a doctor. And we kept in class going. We had been teaching for like 4 or 5 weeks. I knew the students already. We knew each other. So when we had the observation, her first comment to me was, you should have corrected that student that used the masculine. And my first reaction was, one, I know this person, and I know that he has a husband. Two, I don't assume that everybody's straight by default, or that this person should have a wife or a husband. And third, even if it was a mistake, let's put it this way, it's not my job to point out in the middle of a class, you are using the wrong gender. So, and obviously, I did not get a good observation grade after it was, but the good part of this observation, it came to me that I maybe should start working and seeing ways that I could incorporate what I was working with queer theory in literature and film into the classroom as a language teacher. And that's where this research started, and that's how I got into queer pedagogy, because I knew about queer theory, and then I decided to read about it, and I found that there were people work with queer pedagogy and how to incorporate queer theory and all the concepts of queer into the classroom. So this is just an introduction to see how this started and how it is important for us as lecturers, as teachers, instructors, professors, to acknowledge the existence of sexual orientation and sexual identity diversity in the classroom, especially for us language instructors. So why this is important? So just for starting, recently the UN has created this. Can you see past the label? This is a UN initiative on sexual identity and sexual orientation, and not in necessarily education, but more it's a broader way of discussing the topics. And out of that came out this Born Free and Equal. It's a book that brings into details all the necessities of discussing in workplace, in schools, and in life, the importance of sexual identity. So these are just references for us to have for future discussion, and how this discussion is not only happening in the classrooms, but it's also happening in different places. And that's why one other reason that we should try to and consider all those aspects in our classroom. So this is just quickly queer theory, and this is from Deborah Britzman, that she talks about queer theory that offers methods of critique to mark the repetitions of normalcy as a structure and as pedagogy. Britzman is probably one of the first authors to work with the concept of queer pedagogy, and she works with psychoanalysis, but her work on queer pedagogy has been very interesting for putting into class how we can think of ways of dealing with this in the language class. And why language class? Because when I was first teaching, and I think from the languages that I've been teaching or had taught, and the languages that I've learned, it's interesting that when we go through textbooks and classes, most of classes, the beginning is always the I, right? I am something, I live somewhere, I do something in most languages. So if you look at the textbooks of Portuguese, Spanish, some that I had the chance, first chapters, it's this who you are, or later, second, third chapter, who your family is. And just by looking at the beginning of the chapters, in the beginning of the first, it's there, the necessity of discussing sexual identity and sexual orientation, because this does not exist in any textbook. it's just not there, as if it's something that it's not necessarily meant to be discussed. We talk about who you are, your hair, your race, your ethnicity, your languages you speak, but this one aspect that's been so much discussed in so many levels of our society, the UN or our daily lives, it's been constantly raised out of the textbooks. So how does queer pedagogy work? This is going to be online. It's just, I'm going to talk briefly about 3 texts that discuss queer pedagogy. So the first one, the practice makes imperfect, imperfect. And this is, and I like this one because they wrote in the 90s. And in the 90s, they're saying that we have resisted writing this article for a long time, knowing from past experience that to speak publicly about the possibilities and the dangers created by being out and queer educators is a speech of either arrogance or profound masochism. So this is coming from a specific place. Like it's the early 90s. It's the let's put it the beginning of queer theory in American academia, and it's already going to queer pedagogy. So the notion of masochism, talking about your identity. So Britzman, is there a queer pedagogy, or Stop Reading Straight? And her question here, it's probably important for us, is exactly if lesbian and gay theory and queer theory can help us as instructors, as teachers. And this is an important text for bringing exactly this question. And I think the answer is yes. So the questions of inclusion and diversity are relevant to all of us as instructors and even as citizens. So the idea that queer pedagogy relate only to those who are queer identified simplifies queer pedagogy, because the point here is not that this is for queer people, it's for everybody to talk about inclusion and to talk about how to bring this inclusion into the classroom as instructors, as part of communities, because those students and even those teachers are being erased of our practices. And finally, the queering pedagogy is a pretty queer thing. We're asking here exactly this. Is it about a queer curriculum? And this is what I'm going to bring next. Yes and no, because what do we mean necessarily by queer curriculum? So this is here what I want to bring to you. Again, it's Britzman. So queer pedagogy could refer to education as carried out by lesbian and gay educators, to curriculum and environments designed for gay and lesbian students, to education for everyone about queers, or to something altogether different. Queer pedagogy could refer to the deliberate production of queer relations and to the production of subjectivities as deviant performance. So again, it's an important question that we have here, and we think we should consider. This is not about being queer. It's about including diversity. So what I want to work with us here, it's 2 perspectives for queer. We work with queer pedagogy as a metaphor, and I try to find a better word for metaphor because I was trying to contrast into the concrete practice. So any suggestions are appreciated with this, with my terminology, because in here as a metaphor, it's exactly what I was saying. This is bringing diversity into the classroom, not necessarily using the textbook or using our practices, but consider the possibility of queering the curriculum, but not in the sense only of working with sexual identities or sexual orientation, but working on it with a different perspective. What is it that this curriculum does that we've been repeating? What are the questions of normalcy in this curriculum that we could change? So this is what we should consider, not only as identity, but as a practice. And the second one, it's what I think is now we need to look at our practices, our textbooks, what do we bring to class, and see how we can manage to work with diversity and questions of sexual orientation and sexual identity in class. So, because let's just, today, like right before this presentation, one of our colleagues at the department, she wrote me saying that she couldn't be here, but she's very interested because right now she's in class working with a gender student in a class of Spanish, a student that does not identify either as male or female, and they've been trying to find ways to work with, for all of those like us who know and speak Romance languages, we know how hard it is to face this possibility of agender, demi-gender, and all those categories that we have here in the United States, and how do we represent? So she's been, right now, how do we work with this in class? The student who's according to him, her, a gender. And how do we bring this to Romance languages or any other language that works with so specific marks of gender in every single word? Because I can talk for Portuguese. Portuguese, everything is gendered. Like the table is feminine for us. There's no neutral. There's not a word is neutral in the language. So if you sit in a chair, the chair is feminine. So this is all concepts that we have in our language classes that we have to do. And we're going to be dealing with this more and more often in our classes. So this is, sorry, I skipped this. This is just a few examples that I have from the Portuguese textbook. When we look at families, it's there. We're not even considering the possibility of divorce in textbooks. Everybody, go ahead. Some of them do. No. See, but I'm using here my Portuguese textbook. Okay, but yes, you're right. But this one here, it's not even bringing into question this, like divorced parents or not married, not with so many other possibilities. And just one more here. And this is probably, this is in Portuguese, but just to explain, this is probably one of the things that shocked me in the Portuguese textbook. And this is a translation that probably by accident, this is the Portuguese construction. Women have been the main agent of such change in their roles in society. By accident. So, how do you put this in a textbook? That women, by accident, have been responsible for their change in the role of society. This is serious. It is serious. So because when the students see it, the first questions that I had, this is an elementary 2 class. The students read it. The first question is, am I reading this right? And yes, you are. And yes, you are. And just one more example that I got from our book, and this is, again, it's the same chapter on women that talk about the possibility, the one here, that the women in the North are by nature bossy. That's the word they use in Portuguese, bossy. This is a reading comprehension text. So they're reading a text that the text says that women in the North, that the majority of households in the north of Brazil women are responsible for those households. So after reading the text, the reading comprehension exercise is, so women in the North are by nature bossy. And finally, the last example, again, about women. This is working with the grammatical gender of a word sometimes changed when augmentative is formed. So the word women in Portuguese, mulher, is feminine, becomes mulherão, masculine. The problem here is that this word mulherão is the most common catcalling word in the country. It's a word that you should not use in any circumstances. This is the queer reading. What it is that we're being repeating in the classes or being put out for the students, because the students are learning the use of augmentatives, and we can even question that. And then that's that they put in the same thing, voice, oven, and woman. The same group. So this is the queer reading of our normalcy or our things that we do that we don't notice. Like, and before this presentation, I had this, I put out on my Facebook page, what do you think of the word mulherão? To see the comments of my friends, and my friends were like, yeah, no, like because we could use the word mulherona in the feminine, bring the feminine to the, that, according to my women friends, would be okay, but no, we don't want this. Like, we don't want to be called mulherão, because it's like you're walking on the streets and somebody's going to call you that, and no, you don't want that. So this is like just a few examples of how we can read. And this is the textbook for Portuguese. And I'm sure we find little things in all textbooks. And this is not a presentation against textbooks. It's not. It's just a presentation that reading carefully the textbook and see what it is that we have there that we can change, or that we can make sure that this is being discussed in class, for the students to bring this discussion into class. This is a chapter. The chapter is about women. So it's a chapter about women. That the topics are change in society, how women have advanced by accident or by mistake. So, and this is what we're trying to bring here, right? And just like recently, I was trying to bring examples that I had in my classes working in textbooks. So with the chapters of family, I recently had a former foster kid family. And the topic was write a short paragraph, it's elementary one, about your family. Yeah, he has no family. He never had a family. He grew up in the foster system. And he comes to me and talks, I'm not going to write this, because I don't have a topic. One is the agender student, and this happened to me 2 weeks ago in this chapter. They had to write a composition about an important woman in their lives, or somebody they admired. Student picked a gender singer, and then she comes to me and says, "Is it okay? And how am I going to use the gender in my composition? What do I use? She, he, for Portuguese?" It's like, okay, we need to stop and think about this now, right? And one other example that happened to me last year, again, the family unit, the student had 4 mothers. He had 2 mothers who were divorced and remarried. So his family was composed of his 2 mothers, his 2 stepmothers, and the step brothers and sisters. And it's a family with no father figure whatsoever. So how is this being represented by us? So these are just a few examples that I have. And I'm sure that we all have examples of what do we do in class that we could bring, and how do we discuss this? Because we're talking about, the question of gender is very important for like Portuguese, Spanish, and I'm assuming French and Italian that are Romance language, that we have this. How do we bring this? Because as I said, gender is a topic of discussion for our languages. And in other languages, even when you say, oh yeah, but like Dutch, my language is neutral, not necessarily. Because we find those marks in any language. So it's important that we, as instructors, are looking at this, what we're bringing to class. So these are a few things that I've been trying to work in classes. This is the first one I brought to class, and the use of PGP, the preferred gender pronoun, that's been used a lot in American classes. And I learned here when I was doing my queer lesbian gay studies certificate. The first thing that the professor asked in class, it was, what's your PGP? So this is, I had never heard it before, and I didn't know how to respond to that question at first. But I brought into my classes the use of the PGP, because we're talking about Portuguese and can talk about Spanish too. When first class, who you are or what you do. I need to know the language, not me, but the language needs to know masculine or feminine. If you're going to say you are a student, I need to know if you're a student ending in O or a student ending in A, in the case of Portuguese. But this, we're in class. Let's discuss this in our language. How do we find this solution for PGP? I don't have an answer for Portuguese in case of agender. I don't have that yet. And I've been working hard with political activists in the country saying, how do we work with this? And what I say to my students is most people that I met in Brazil are using the feminine as their pronoun of choice. Because unfortunately, the language does not offer that possibility for the students. So it is a political choice that they have to make in class. And it is something that we have to navigate in class throughout the semester in compositions and writings and examples and how we're going to bring this to class. And it's a constant question of struggle. You may find some words and adjectives that are not gendered, but this is a question that needs to bring to class. The other one is just the concept of families instead of family. And using the Portuguese textbook, that's one family. And this is what are the other families? And bringing even from television or pop culture, we have so many more examples right now that we could use to bring this. And I always remember that one student that I had here with the 4 mothers and how he called them all mothers. They're all mothers. So this is another perception. And this is the recognition of difference in our practices. And this is a constant, like for me, it's a constant practice. It's like every day, what it is that I say when I say it in Portuguese, that I'm bringing some remains of our cultural machismo that I bring to class and I don't notice. And what is interesting, once you start working with the students since the beginning with PGP, with questions of families, and the students notice that this is happening, they warn you about, or question you when I say something that maybe I should not be saying, is that okay? Because it brings awareness to students. And this is what I think it's the beauty of the working with queer pedagogy and working with this and then bringing it to class, because it brings awareness to the students. And as I said in the beginning, it's not about only the queer students, it's about everybody. It's about everybody is raising awareness for language and for sexual identity and sexual orientation diversity in class. This is, I found this in Portuguese, so all the gender identities. It's a brief explanation of what it is of being cis, of being trans, of being gender fluid, of being demigender, of being agender, and being non-binary. These are a few words that we can use when we talk about gender identity and sexual orientation. 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, the New York Magazine had an article about sex in colleges. I don't know if you guys saw that. And in that article, there's this one list with more than 20 words that students currently use in colleges to define what they are. We need to accept it. We need to respect that. We need to bring that to class, and we make this part of the discussion. So this is the closest that I got in Portuguese that I can bring into class to my students of identification. So they say, I could say, I'm cis, I'm trans, and it works in the first step. But when we come to the adjectives in Portuguese, we have to go back to masculine and feminine, but at least we're starting a possibility in a possible discussion here for classes. And using a different example. So this chapter about women, I brought to class a video, an interview with a trans woman from Brazil to talk about being a woman. And it's her life as a trans, and she's a supermodel, she's famous. So it's easier when you have famous people that talk about this. And luckily, in the case of Brazil, we've been we have those examples that I can bring to class. So this unit about women, let's talk about this trans woman and this discussion at Barnard that's been very important, that all the students are talking about at Barnard, the acceptance of trans students and how to work with trans students in class. How is Barnard going to bring the trans students to college? This is in their lives. They're asking this every day. Maybe we can find more examples in other languages for that. So the concept of queer pedagogy and queer theory, it's not about the right method or what is it we're going to use in class. Like this is what we're going to be using, this is what we're not going to be using. But it's about creating a safe space for students and for teachers. And I can talk about my personal experience about teaching, because the moment that I stopped not verbalizing, like if I have to use an example in class and I have to say about my partner or boyfriend, like 10 years ago, I would probably be using the feminine. I don't do that anymore. I don't do that. I accept my identity, and my identity is in my language, the language that I teach, and this comes to class. So if I have to use, it's like I have a boyfriend or I have a partner, this is marked by my sexual orientation and my sexual identity. This is not out of the class anymore, as it was the instruction from when I started teaching. I had clear instructions of not to talk about this in class. And hopefully that is not the case anymore. I don't know. I know that here, it's never been, since I've been here for 5 years, so we never had an issue here at Columbia. But this is also opening up for the students to understand that how we work with language teaching. Because if we go back to the textbook and we're talking about first chapter, who am I, what I do, where I live, my daily activities, or my family, and what do I do with my family, this needs to come to class. And as an instructor, this is my language that I'm teaching. This is how I use my language. And I constantly need to be aware of the possible mistakes that I made when I'm dealing with sexual identity and sexual orientation, because this is, one, constantly changing, and two, changing the language we use. That's what I mean by when we say constantly changing. This is very recent in Brazil. This was not there 5 years ago, this concept. That's what I mean by constantly changing. In our perception, how do we present ourselves? And this needs to be reflected in the language, because if we're learning a foreign language, this needs to be reflected. If we're starting by who we are, this is part of who we are. So what really helped me with all those concepts is reading the textbooks and reading and looking at the textbook with a different eye. Because I've been using this book for 5 years, and the concept of bossy only came to my mind 2 years ago. It only appeared into my eyes 2 years ago. So for 3 years prior, that example was there, being used, being there. So it's a constant practice. It's an everyday practice of how to work with this. So this is just a few other, it's a bibliography. But this is we're not going to see the videos because I couldn't get to play, but this is Jennifer Miller, the first one. And this is Jacqueline Rhodes. Jacqueline Rhodes has worked with the failure of queer pedagogy. And this is a concept that I like a lot, because we're using failure here, not in the negative concept of failure, but as a possibility of not necessarily making a mistake, but the attempt or just accepting failure. She's using the concept from Jack Halberstam, that just published a book called The Queer Art of Failure, that I've been using a lot. And Jennifer Miller works with queer pedagogy in public spaces. I don't know if you know about, this is another case of a person that is not necessarily conforming to any gender, but they own a circus troupe called Amuk, and they do queer interventions in the city. And what they're working is a queer pedagogy in social spaces. Their last intervention that it's in the video, it's in New York City, Washington Square, and they're working with race in the US and in New York. And Jacqueline Rhodes is questioning the failure of queer pedagogy. And I like this because we're not necessarily working with the failure concept, but necessarily with the attempt. And with this as not negative. Let's look at this a different way. Let's look at the failure concept of being. And this is what all the gender discussion is trying to bring to us with the queer pedagogy. So, just to finish, this is what I want to bring about the concepts of queer pedagogy. Queer theory is not only the acknowledge of the existence of sexual orientation and sexual identity diversity, but the possibility of diverse practices when it comes to teaching and when it comes to acknowledging the existence of our language instructor practices. This is how I want to think of this. The way I want to think of this presentation is as rethinking practices and rethinking the textbook and what we use in class and what we say and what the students say in class, that the students are okay to verbalize whatever it is that they need to say. And as I said, failure, acknowledging the failure of our own limitations. Like in Portuguese, I don't have an option for a gender yet in terms of adjectives, in terms of nouns. We need to work with this in class. I need to acknowledge this fact, and I need to discuss with my students, what is it we're going to do now? I cannot just accept that they're going to use the feminine or the masculine, but this discussion is important. It needs to be done in class with those. And this is where Portuguese specifically is failing with as a language in terms of identity. Thank you.